Welcome to our part 2 interview with Sarah Collison. So in this episode, we'll go through the AT process, what we do before funding, and our AT assessment. So we know that assistive technology can be game-changing, but there is quite a process to it to identify the right solution for a client. Can you talk us through what that process would look like, or what it looks like for you?
Yeah, so I think comprehensive and thorough assessment is always the starting point for any kind of AT prescription. It's really about understanding the person, their needs, their goals, their aspirations, and also their environment as well, in terms of understanding what's going to work and what's not going to work. So generally with a AT assessment, we would always have a look at what are they currently using, what are they not currently using, what's working, what's not working, what is it that they want to be able to do in terms of any goals that they may have that they're wanting to achieve, whether it's within the home or outside of the home or in the wider local community. And then looking at, well, what are the possible solutions that are out there? And one of the things I kind of learned early on was it's not so much about jumping straight to a piece of tech, but really about understanding almost the mode of tech or the mode of mobility first, particularly if we're talking about AT items that are there to facilitate mobility. And so working through a bit of a hierarchy of those kind of lower cost, low risk solutions right through to the more high cost, high risk. So, if we think about, a cane as being very low cost, low risk, to then a walker, to a frame, then to perhaps a manual wheelchair, then maybe a manual wheelchair with power assist, and then perhaps it's a scooter or a power chair, and kind of working through that hierarchy and eliminating things as we go on the basis of, is it going to work in the environment they wish to use it in? Is it going to work in terms of their needs, in terms of posture, anthropometrics, all those types of things? So, and once you've kind of narrowed down that mode of mobility, it's then going, well, what are the tech items that fit within that range? So if we're looking, for example, at power assist, what's compatible with the wheelchair they currently have, or what's compatible with the environment they need to use it in, the carers who need to be able to lift it and transfer it in and out of the car. All of those things is what needs to be considered. So assessment is a really important process. And I always say it's not a one-off. It is a process. Part of that is those initial conversations. It's what's on the referral, but then it's also your face-to-face appointment. It's the follow-up. It's the continued liaison that you have with the client, with the AT supplier. All of those things form the basis of that overarching comprehensive assessment. And so trials, when you eventually get to trials, should then all be really well informed about how did we decide that this was the piece of AT that we were going to trial. And one of the things I always kind of talk to OTs about is that, one of the criteria that the NDIS wants to see satisfied is what is effective and beneficial for someone. And really, when it comes to selecting a piece of AT, it's no different to buying a car. You're not going to go out and buy a brand new car without test driving 2 or 3 different types of vehicles, right? Without thinking about what sort of car you need for the number of people in your family, who's going to drive it, where do you want to drive it to, can you park it in your garage? Like all those things that you would consider when you're buying a car, it's no different to if you're then buying a piece of AT. And so when you're trialing, you're looking at, well, what are the features and benefits that this piece of AT provides? And how does that compare to this piece of AT here? And which one is going to get us the best functional outcome or the most functional benefit? And that's what the NDIS needs to see as a prescriber. What was the process that you went through to determine that? What was the outcome of the trial? One of the things I saw very early on, I had a client of mine who needed to have a wheelchair prescribed. It had already been knocked back once by the NDIS. And the support coordinator actually had some feedback from the agency and said, the NDIS does not want to see that you considered 5 things and only trialed 1. They actually want to see that you trialed more than 1. And I remember saying to the support coordinator, well, of course they would, because you can't say something is effective and beneficial unless you directly compared it with at least one other thing. Like I can't say that this car parked in my driveway was the best car for me if I only trialed that car. it was the only car I trialed. And it's the same with a piece of AT. If we want to say that this wheelchair is the most effective and beneficial, you have to have compared it to at least one other wheelchair to be able to say that. And to look at how someone goes in the trials of those AT items and the different features and benefits, and making those comparisons to go, yep, this one gets us the outcome that we actually want, and be really clear about what that outcome actually is. Is it to access the community? Is it to be independent in the home? And that's the skill set that OTs need to have. It's that clinical reasoning and decision-making process that we go through that then has to be documented and shared with the agency for them to go, oh, yeah, I can get that. I get it. I see how this is going to have the outcome that we would need. And I think a lot of OTs rush that process and don't always show that clinical reasoning to the agency in a way that helps them say, oh, yeah, I'm happy to approve and fund this. So,
yeah. I remember when I was working in the NDIS space and doing AT assessments, I felt sometimes quite a lot of pressure to get it done very quickly, because the client would, they need their shower chair now, and I can see how it can be very easy to just try and get whatever's available, quickest thing that you can. But then I had mentors that would come back to that, we need to really look at that we need to do the AT process correctly, because they might end up with the wrong thing. It doesn't work in their shower, and then they're upset with you anyway.
Yeah.
So I had to, I guess, help manage those expectations with clients about what the process entails and why it's, not just quickly hopping over to the closest store and just getting whatever. But that it had to take, I had to do a proper analysis of the environment, of what they were currently using. Do you find that that's something that OTs do need to do, that kind of managing expectations?
It's a huge part of our role, huge part. And I think it starts right from the outset, from managing their expectations about how long it's going to take, managing their expectations about how many hours are going to be needed, and also managing their expectations about whether the NDIS may or may not fund what they're asking for. And I think the last one is probably the biggest one that we have to deal with, is that often people come in with very high expectations of what will be funded. And if only one thing good has come out of the new NDIS support list, it's that we have very clear black and white now about what will and won't be funded by the scheme. And that can be very helpful to have some of those conversations with participants. So what I find, though, is that there are still participants who think they will be the exception to the rule. And it doesn't matter how many conversations you try to have with them or how much you try to manage those expectations. It won't be until the NDIS actually tells them, no, we're not going to fund this, that they will accept it.
Yeah.
And for some of those clients, you can only try to manage expectations to a point. And then it's saying, okay, it's you have choice and control here. I'm letting you know what I think the outcome's going to be. But if you would like to see this through, we can do that. But I just need you to know that it's very unlikely it will be approved. This is what you should expect. And go from there, because unless they get it from the NDIS, they will continue to think that they will be the exception.
Yeah. It's good to have those more clear guidelines to would we fund it page is quite useful for that.
It can be, yeah. So
I think in terms of AT expectations as well, there's I think especially I've heard with wheelchairs, it's not finding something that works for, or it's not going to be perfect in all aspects. It's like you have a lot of clients that will be saying like, oh, I want it to be lightweight, but I want it to be going off-road, and I want it to fold it up and go into my boot. But having to choose what is most important most of the time, I think is what I've heard, especially with something like wheelchairs, where very difficult to find something that's perfect in all aspects.
Yeah, there's not always that perfect solution. There's an element sometimes to compromise. So, and that's having those really open discussions. And also then that's why trials are so important, right? Because you can then compare what this one can do, what it can't do compared to this one over here, which one works best for you. So, and helping to make that informed decision about what the best AT option is going to be.
Yeah. And how would you teach junior OTs how to do good clinical reasoning, or what to focus on when they're doing their report, like what is going to work to communicate well to the NDIS, taking into account we don't know if he's reading it.
Yeah.
How are they going to understand what this client's needs are and why I'm prescribing a specific?
Yeah, I think clinical reasoning and report writing are two very different skills. So clinical reasoning happens throughout your assessment and intervention process. It's what you are constantly doing. And I have to say that it can be hard sometimes to teach that as a skill to OTs. You would hope that it's something that they have learnt as part of their university degree. And so really what you're teaching them is about how to analyze tasks or how to compare features and make comparisons, things like that. And that it's that innate clinical reasoning that then allows those things to occur. So for me, when it comes to kind of how do you teach an OT on the job to do that, it's very much walking them through the process of assessment. This is what we're assessing. This is what we're looking for. Now you need to take that information, throw it all up in your head and start making some decisions about what does it look like is the right option? Does it give us the outcome we're trying to achieve? Will it work in their environment? Is it going to be operated by the person? And that all comes from having done a really thorough assessment. So if your assessment in the first instance is not thorough and comprehensive, it's very hard to then clinically reason to get a really good outcome for someone because you don't have all that information in your head that you now need to pull apart and tease apart and interpret to start making some of those decisions. So assessment is key to being able to do good clinical reasoning. And so then I think when it comes to actually sitting down and writing a report, it's about taking that clinical reasoning and decision-making that you've gone through and presenting that on paper and explaining and talking through to the NDIS, how did I get to this decision? What was it that led me to that? What did I see? What did I observe? What was said to me? What did I notice at the assessment? What did I see at the trials? What did I identify when I made this comparison? And actually writing that in a way that brings the NDIS into the room with you. And it's like they're in your brain and go, I can see how Sarah came to this conclusion. You know, she saw this at the assessment and then identified that at the trial. And therefore, that's how we've decided that this piece of AT is the right one. And I can see why she eliminated all of those other options because she told me what was wrong with those and why they wouldn't achieve that. And then told me about all the features and benefits of this AT item and how they will achieve what needs to be achieved. And so report writing is very much storytelling in a sense of what was the participant's journey? What did we go through? What did we identify? What did we assess? What did we conclude? And how is that going to get the outcome that we're looking for? So the two are, you know, as I said, very different skills, but still intertwined because report writing is reflecting, obviously, in a document form, that clinical reasoning that took place upstairs.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. It's a good way to put it, actually, is that you're kind of walking them through the story that you've experienced with the client, that they can see that as well. Yeah, it's actually a really, really good way to explain it.
Yeah, and I once had an NDI planner bring me one day, this is a few years ago, it's a particular planner. I don't even know if he's still at the agency now, but we used to just know him by his first name because he would always be difficult, but difficult in a sense that it also provided insight into what the agency needed to actually make these decisions, which was then helpful. And so this particular planner rang me one day because he'd received a complex home mods report from me. And he said, oh, Sarah, I just don't understand why you have recommended this lift and why you haven't recommended a ramp. And I was like, well, if you have a look at the photos in the report, you will see that this front door is on the second level of a house. The front entry is above the garage. Like there are 12 steps to get up there. That's a rise of over 2 meters. Like, there's no possible way that I could do a ramp there. And he said to me, but Sarah, what looks obvious to you when you're standing there at the property is not obvious to me when I'm reading this report. And it was this kind of realization that, you know, the
planners at the agency have to make these decisions are not allied health professionals. They have often never seen or met they've never met any of these clients, right? But they often don't have a lot of lived experience with disability either to really understand why you can't put a ramp on a property that has a 2-meter rise to the front door. And so my assessment report had not included that as a thing that I had ruled out because I thought it was really obvious. And basically what he'd said to me was, no, I need you to make it really obvious to me because I need to see how you went through that hierarchy of all the possible home mod solutions to get to the lift being the solution.
Yeah.
And so that's why I always say, even though it's really obvious to you as the OT, your clinical reasoning took you through that process. It took you through that journey of determining that that was not a solution, but you need to explain to the NDIS why that wasn't a solution.
Sure.
And so I always say to people, when you're writing reports, you need to find a way to bring the agency into the room with you. You need to be really descriptive in your report writing. Use terminology that makes sense to them. Use photographs. And I always say to people, don't just put a photo in and think that the reader is going to know what you are showing them in the photo. You actually have to label it. You have to caption it and say, look at this. Look at this house that has a set of 12 stairs. Look at the space in the front yard. There is no possible way of fitting a ramp in here. And beyond that, also include a drawing of what that ramp would look like if it was trying to navigate a rise of 2 meters, even though that is so ridiculous to us as OTs because we know that this ramp will have probably 6 or 7 kickbacks on it. And there's no way anyone would actually build that ramp, but you have to show that to the agency for them to understand a ramp is not an option. Okay. So it's really about that clinical reasoning that you've gone through that is so natural to you as an OT, having to share that with the agency in a way that helps them to understand and go on that journey with you so that when they get to the end of the report, they're like, oh, that totally makes sense. Of course we would do a lift. Of course we wouldn't do a ramp. Of course we wouldn't do a stair lift. Of course we would do a vertical lift. That's the only solution. And I'm really clear about why that's the only solution because Sarah has shown me through her reasoning that she undertook to get to making that decision.
Yeah. Well, that's a really, really good advice. And it makes sense when you think of like this person has no context. Like you might have worked with a client for a while and you know all of this background information and they look at it and it's not going to make sense. So it's a really good way to think of it. And I think photos, I've always found has been really helpful as well, or diagrams as well. So that's a really, really good advice. Something that that I've heard of with lately with the NDIS and AT prescriptions is that some OTs have struggled with, writing a really good report. They've recommended equipment that they have good clinical reasoning on, but then the AT process of actually having it approved takes quite long. That it's to the point where this report's not relevant anymore, or it has to be updated and they have to go through the whole process again. Is that something that you've heard occur?
Yeah, look, the timeframes around AT and home mods approvals are certainly blowing out quite significantly. They're certainly getting worse and not better. And there doesn't seem to be any sort of indication from the agency about why that is the case or what they're trying to do to resolve that, unfortunately. We know that there are a significant number of newer staff within the agency. I think last time I heard this quoted, it was something like, 50% of planners have only been there for less than 12 months.
Wow.
So that is obviously a very high number. But I think it's still a bit unclear about why there is such a delay, though, for AT and home mods, because the way that those approvals work is that they go to a centralised technical advisory team within the agency, and they are actually reviewed by that team. They don't make the final decision. They provide guidance and advice back to the planners about the decision to be made. So if they see all the information's there and they say yes, then they would say to the planner, this should be approved, you should create a new plan. But if they see there's an issue, then that goes to the planner, who might then email and go, we need some more information, or we need some clarification. Or sometimes you get planners that just go, not enough information, we're declining it. And that kind of sets everything back to the beginning again, which is really frustrating. But it's certainly a process that it's very unclear at the moment as to what is really causing this delay, because, you know, we've had the technical advisory branch in there for quite a number of years now. They seemingly are functioning as they were. Nothing has changed there. So we don't know if the issue is in the planning team, not escalating in a timely manner. There's too many applications, but what's really unclear, unfortunately.
So is there anything that you think that could be done from the OT side to help manage that, or was it just keep your I guess good record keeping, and then if you have to redo an assessment, you're not starting from scratch?
Look, I think it's making sure that, number one, they've received the application, making sure it's got everything in it that it needs to have, that it's got the quotes attached, making sure you actually get the receipt number back from the NDIA, and then providing that to the participant and the support coordinator so that they can then actually follow that up. So now certainly OTs can assist with the follow-up as well, but a number of times that you call the agency and they say, we won't speak to you because you're the OT, it's usually got to be the participant or the support coordinator. But, you know, it's really just there's delays. We don't know why there are delays, and we at the moment, and participants unfortunately are just waiting. So
yeah. Thank you. I will go on to our next section on after the approval of AT.